One of the themes yesterday, of course, that's really a theme every day in higher ed around the world is capacity, right? Nigeria in particular is an example that pops out of many, just tons of students ready to go, but no seat, minimal online availability, et cetera. So this panel is going to address some of those related issues about capacity and how we get people into the right help they need to move on in their education journeys. So I want to quickly introduce the panel, and they're going to probably reintroduce themselves as well. But Dr. Raul Chahuda is here. He's going to be our moderator, and they're going to give their backgrounds. But he's a global higher ed strategist and DrEducation.com. Do I have that right? Dr. Marcy Powell is here. Very excited. She's own consulting, but has been on boards for the U.S. Distance Learning Association and ICDE, correct? Dr. Bakari Diallo is here from African Virtual University, and our old friend, not old in the, our young friend who we've known a long time, Dr. Vijay Kumar of MIT, who also is been very much involved in all their open learning. Great stuff happening at MIT. And so please welcome this great panel, and let's get started. Thank you.
All right. This one, and Bakri. Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. And as they say in DC, oh wow, it's cold out there. I'm glad I'm in this room. We had an amazing day yesterday in terms of stretching our imagination, getting our creative juices flowing. And we have a lot of problems to solve, and there are some of the best brains to solve the problems are in this room. So the first thing is this will be a little bit interactive session in the sense that we would encourage questions as we move along. You don't have to wait for the questions all the way towards the end. Each of us will present our viewpoint, our perspective on this theme of creating capacity for post-secondary education. We'll give you a chance to share your perspective in the form of a couple of questions or brief comments. We'll keep it sharp and focused. And then we'll have a longer discussion towards the end. And let me kick it off. The agenda is that first I have to read the bios, which will take 15 minutes. No. We have really a distinguished panel with us. These are really the who's and who of the sector who have been there, done that in terms of solving some of the biggest issues we are facing related to capacity in post-secondary education. And they have expertise in online learning, distance education, open education resources, each one of them. And so as Jeff has already mentioned, Bakri, of course, he got his PhD from Canada, worked there, and took this massive, bold initiative to go back to Kenya and take up this initiative with African Virtual University. So he understands how to pan out the digital learning initiatives in Africa. Of course, we have Marcy Powell. Many of you know her from her previous engagement, but she's an education futurist, knowing a lot about education innovation and technology, and also, of course, her leadership roles in associations, including ICDE and USDLA. So she will share her perspective on EdTech and educational learning technology side. And finally, Dr. Vijay Kumar, his claim to fame is that all three of us have met him at some point of time in the last 10 years, and he doesn't remember. So, of course, a pioneer in open learning, and for over 20 years, 2 decades, he has led this initiative of open learning at MIT, and no better person we can ask for in terms of what's happening in the sector and what is the potential for us, but also pitfalls. So we'll talk about all those aspects. My background is pretty much as someone who can be replaced by a watch, because I'm a moderator, and my job is to make sure that everybody stays on time. But yeah, my background is on international higher education, which means that I work with universities around the world to help them grow their internationalization strategy. And one of the things which have been emerging in the last 3 to 5 years is the increasing interest of not only recruitment of students, but how do they take programs through online learning to the student in different places. And that will be my perspective on this topic. So let's get started. Of course, if you are on Twitter, the hashtags are and the Twitter handle is also there. My primary argument is coming from mega trends, and we talk about mega trends from this definition of John Naisbitt from 1982, where he said that these are transformational long-term processes. We don't observe them on a day-to-day basis, or even yearly basis, but if you see them on a longer term from 5-7 years frame, they are transformative. And so from a definition or an analogy, from iPhone, initial version 10 years ago, to what you see in the current version, I don't think so it's transformational. It's incremental. The screen size keeps going bigger, and the number of apps keep getting added more. But what was transformational was that move from BlackBerry to iPhone. It changed the interface, it changed the expectations and the consumer behavior of how they interact. So if you take that analogy, and we think about higher education, that transformation is taking place today in terms of the capacity mismatch, in terms of unmet demand, in terms of there are more learners who want to be part of education system, and there is not enough supply. But that supply is also not evenly distributed. We will see that there are countries where there is oversupply, and then there are countries there is undersupply. And hence the question, what role will online learning, open education resources are going to play in solving that problem? The 3 megatrends, quickly, you know all of them, but the creative part I did was not to spell the demographics correctly. So demographic shifts, technological shift, and the economic structures which are changing. These are the 3 big things I've identified. There could be 4, 5, 10 others. But to me, these are big because the confluence of these 3 megatrends is really dramatic in terms of what will happen to higher education in the next 5, 10 years. Quick data point to support that. If you look at the global economic growth, the middle class growth from emerging market is booming. So the white circle is the current economic output of these countries, and the blue circle is what is expected by 2030. So you can see the clear inference. China, look at the dramatic growth from such a small dot to a massive proportion of the GDP. Even India, look at the percentage of growth, but then you also see the disparity that there are countries and regions which will not be able to catch up to that same pace. But there is talent there. There is human potential which needs to be given that opportunity to get education. Many of them you can see in South Asia also, Bangladesh, Nepal, even in India, there could be a lot of untapped potential. Of course, Sub-Saharan Africa. We have talked about it from a couple of examples yesterday, and we will talk more today. But you can see the developed countries, EU 27, United States, they are large today. They will be large 20 years later, but the percentage growth is not significant. Second data point about automation. All of us know the impact from different perspectives. This is a data point from McKinsey to support that how much of displacement is going to happen, which will be larger in developing countries, and where already the access to education is very limited. I'm going to share one data point here from UNESCO Institute of Statistics. I looked up between 2007 and 2017, the 10 years, the lower middle income countries, example, India, Nigeria, Kenya, Bangladesh, Nepal, Vietnam, Lower middle income countries added 27 million people in post-secondary education in 10 years. High income countries, including US, Canada, Australia, and the whole, like we talked about the club, they added 4 million post-secondary education students. So 7 times more students added in lower middle income countries. However, even with that growth, less than 30% of the addressable population is getting higher education. So there's a huge mismatch. And so the automation is still going to affect a lot more the uneducated segment of the population who is not getting access to post-secondary education. The third data point was related to the demographics. We have talked about the youth population, the growth in it, and the demographic dividend, or the challenges which may come with it. But one thing we miss out is the rapidly aging population also in the developed economies. This is a data point to say that 82% of the growth in population between 2015 and 2030 will be driven by people aged 35 and over. Now, a clear argument and case for reskilling, upskilling as the for the working population, working adults. And that's why open education or distance education can provide that flexibility to learn while you are continuing to work and reskill. And this was my data point to connect those 3 mega trends to say, this is a complicated slide. This is a time you take a meditation moment. Deep breath. On one axis, you see the income level, X. On the Y-axis, you see the ratio of total population in 2030 compared to today, which means how much of the population is going to grow in 15 years. Anyone would like to interpret what does this red bubble means? Any guess? The countries there are Uganda, Nigeria, Zambia, versus the purple dots, which are Germany, and the blue dot is USA. The interpretation is that the population which is growing the highest has lower income and hence also an untapped potential for access, affordability, and the flexibility, which is definitely needs to be solved on priority. So that's pretty much it from my side as an argument that we need to move forward by solving some of these challenges through affordability, flexibility, and lifelong learning so that we can address the issues related to the emerging mega trends in next 5 to 10 years. And a lot of it could come from the blended approach. Now here, the blended, when we talk about, is not about just the modality, online, offline. My argument of blended is a little bit more play of word to say blended about disciplines, which is interdisciplinary. So how do we blend the discipline to offer the real skills for the future? How do we blend institutions, which means the partnerships? Not everyone can do everything. So what would it take to come together to be better partners in solving these problems? And finally, geographies. How would it, let's take the example of Sailor, being in the US but serving a large proportion of their learners around the world. You are taking your learning to different geographies, and many other institutions also intending to do that. So that's a blended definition I'm using in addition to the modalities. How do we blend disciplines, institutions, and geographies to solve some of these problems? Now, my job here also is to just raise some questions and don't answer them, because we have an expert panel with them. So I have raised this question that how do we create and innovate for a future where higher education is accessible to a large segment of the population in an affordable manner, in a flexible manner, and offering continuous learning paths. So it's not a one-time opportunity, but a continuous learning opportunity. And we'll find some of the solutions with our panel. But before I pass it on to Vijay to share his perspective on what he's seeing from where he sits in terms of open learning and the initiatives he leads, Any questions, clarifications, challenges? This is a good time related to what we have just discussed in the last 10 minutes. Over to Vijay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Where does this go? So good morning. There was a reference to educational futures. I'm an educational futurist. My doctoral work was actually in the Future Studies program. So in some sense, I look at all of us as futurists. There are no experts here. Futurists, but our definition of a futurist, picking up on apparently the optimism dimension that was introduced yesterday, is that a futurist is one who makes future possibilities more real for others. So we are about co-constructing the future, and I think the optimistic note is I think that we have a lot of things at hand that we can do interesting combinatorials with in order to move towards better and better solutions. And much has been said. Rahul, first of all, thank you, Jeff. Thanks to the Saylor Foundation for the invitation. This is, as he pointed out, I'm old. I just look young, but this is not my first. And it's really very interesting the work that has been going on over here because it speaks to exactly the problem and the kinds of solution strategies that we need to collectively work on. So thank you, and Rahul, thanks for the intro. But as you talked about the demand part, and yesterday also it was very interesting. The panels highlighted various aspects of this demand landscape that we see. But I want to just add some color to a few of those demand items. For instance, when Rahul just mentioned large numbers of people, and I would really want to look at who is this new learner that we want to be able to provide educational opportunities to. And I said there's one of the, by the way, we all, I think, take for given the impact that technology is having on the workforce, on our education. In fact, I was just telling people in the cab that the most potent statement about that I heard from Michael Saylor a few years ago when he was giving a talk, when he says, look, when we studied geography, we looked at atlases and maps, right? And now that became a million images on Google Earth, and now it's an intelligence service in your watch, a GPS service. So and that sort of statement stuck with me. So everything that we look at moves from being a hard product to a soft intelligence service. And you start thinking about what are the implications for learning? How do you prepare learners early on so that they can not only respond to this emerging economy, emerging market force, but actually influence it in constructive ways. So that's our learning challenge. So that's, some the technology influence. But more than that, when you think about this new generation of diverse learners, it's all the stuff, the upskilling folks, the people who are either displaced, and I also say who are differently abled, because when we talk about these large numbers of people, we are talking about learners who are differently motivated, differently prepared, differently disposed, who have different aspirations, and who are displaced not because, we're doing this very big project with Save the Children for teachers in Jordan, the Syrian crisis, who are displaced today because of a socio-political crisis, tomorrow because of global warming, day after tomorrow because the labor markets have moved, right? Or who are just displaced by virtue of being in a job and they want to switch a job, they want to upskill, so they are positionally displaced because of where they are. How do you provide flexible, as Rahul said, learning opportunities and first of all, having a more generous definition of the term displaced learner, more generous definition of the term who is the new learner, the diverse learner, because what we typically do is brush it off and say, oh, these are the new millennials. No, those are the new learners. They're young, they're old, they're different. And then differently abled, and we see this. When you say differently abled, it's not only about people who might have vision impairment or oral impairment, but people who have math disabilities, who have physics, who need computational fluency into this thing. So sort of having a more generous way of thinking about disabled and displaced so that we can plan learning opportunities. In case that seems very daunting, here's the good news, the optimist, right? I believe, and and we see this, and all of us in this room are here, I suspect, because in some way we touch this. I believe that the confluence of the increasing centrality of digital in education, open education, and what we're learning from the learning sciences, this triad of forces really gives us the opportunity for disruptive change. And I want to use, I want to not just talk about transformation, but disruptive transformation. And what do we mean disruptive? Disruptive is not doing extensions around what you're doing. Disruptive is when structural relationships, existing structural relationships are disrupted. In the open world, a long time ago, Sir John Daniels from Open University would talk about breaking of the iron triangle, when this immutable triangle of access, cost, and quality was actually rendered mutable because of open. Suddenly you say that, no, you can't have great access without a diminishing of quality. You can't have great quality without a proportionate increase in cost. It can actually look more like a scalene triangle rather than this immutable triangle, right? So that kind of disruption. So here when we talk about structural disruption, which is what we need, and which is what these confluence of forces affords us, we are talking about the relationship between the learner, the institution, the credential, all these being disrupted, and that is what we are seeing through this thing. In fact, yesterday in the panel, when I was hearing the country panel from the ambassadors about the various challenges that they face, one of the things is that we also notice that we rush to cast our solutions in the context of colleges, formal education, degrees, whereas the solutions might lie in different kinds of intersections, and as we'll show. And I say disruption, and is one of the things that we see is that everything from how we deliver courses to credentials is being disrupted. And I just want to point to a couple of things, some of them are drawn from MIT that show that. What I want to say is that every element of teaching and learning is being disrupted through these forces on how courses are delivered, through how credentials are obtained, through how labs are done. So for instance, what used to be a lecture is a 6-minute video segment, immediately followed by visualization if you don't understand the concept. And I'm wondering if there is any way of getting that going. Anyway, what you'll have seen over here, is there a way to get this going? Anyway, is immediately after the course, someone can do a game-like environment, right? Where, I do not know, is this being fired off here? This should do it. Oops.
Yes, it was working.
Okay, that's fine. What it does is it's a game-like environment that you can construct. So the latency between learning and applying something, you don't have to wait till the end. Immediately you construct a game-like environment. You do that. It's from the first circuits course that was done on edX. You can have an automatic assessment, auto-graded problem. So learning, applying, testing, frequent formative testing, that entire cycle is now disrupted because of this, right? You do not have to wait till for 6 months before you do an exam, right? You have frequent formative assessments. You do not, you can apply, and there is enough learning science to back you up, to tell you that a 6-minute video segment is not because somebody dreamt of it. It's because of the attention span, right? That interleaving practice and this kind of application with low latency immediately of a lecture is not a figment of somebody's imagination, but the fact that the slope of the forgetting curve is reduced because of that kind of interleaving. So it's not just about recalling immediately after you have learned, but recalling stuff, for instance, when you're working within downstream. So this reconstruction of the learning experience that is possible, and when you're informed by data about different kinds of learners, it actually casts the teacher, the instructor, the facilitator, more in the realm of a modern-day pilot who's responding to different kinds of data and landing different kinds of people with different aspirations successfully. And so that's possible. So here so this is about courses and delivery. I'm looking at this now about credentials. This was launched a few years ago, the MicroMasters program by MIT. And so one of the things that happened, this is a 5-course sequence. The most popular one is in supply chain management. Now there are ones in developmental economics, and advanced manufacturing, etc., a 5-course sequence, MIT courses fully online that anybody in the world can take for free, right? They do the course. So there is a fee for taking proctored exams that you do. But here's the kicker is, and I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a TV evangelist, but the kicker is that if you choose, you can, and if you're, you do well in the test, etc., you can be eligible to get admitted to do 1 semester at MIT and to get a terminal degree if it exists in that area, in supply chain. So these are 5 courses. Now, what this has done, why is this disruptive? It's disruptive because anybody can have a good education from those courses, right? It does not say you have to get admitted to MIT in order to avail. Only if you want that kind of credential. Now, the good news is there are about 63 institutions who have come in, who say, you do those courses, you come and spend the semester at my place, at the American University of Cairo, you do it at RIT, right? And you will get the terminal degree from that place, the locality. So you do these courses. So it marries the opportunities of open with, and then says, here are different credentialing opportunities that you can take. And in case you're interested, and the proof of the pudding is what you see here, is when you get those online credentials, right? Industry is recognizing it. That's an important part of the ecosystem. It's not just about online credentials. But people say, look, I only care about the fact that you got your upskilling through these courses. So this is my point, saying that every aspect from courses to credentials is being disruptively innovated upon because of the confluence of these forces. Open, you know the numbers from OpenCourseWare to MITx courses. This was just to highlight that there is a lot of open. And what all this says is that now we can have different kinds of opportunities. You do online courses, you do intense 2-week boot camps, you do micromasters, and suddenly you have a variety of pathways to address the transformation problem that Rahul pointed out to. How do you educate so many people, not in one fixed way, but in a variety of ways. So this is the point, and then this is the new landscape, therefore. The landscape is not just about colleges and institutions. It's about AR and VR technology. In fact, we are using virtual reality to introduce teachers to the kinds of challenges. There is a Woodrow Wilson Academy that I'm a PI of, and what we do is train future teachers for challenge-based education. So you use virtual reality to introduce them to the kinds of challenges that they'll encounter in the classroom, whether they are math challenges or social emotional challenges. You don't have to wait till that in-service experience. Blockchain technology, for the last 2 years, we've been giving credentials. So we started using blockchain technology so that the learner owns his or her credentials. It's non-paper based. They can collaborate. We have a set of institutions. Of course, part of the challenge is that it requires agreement on standards, and initially you work at it through a set of, a coalition of the willing, and then you start moving it up to where these things can become standards. But this is a new landscape of courses, programs, which is the opportunity space to address the challenge that Rahul put forth. I will say that for the name of the game is quality at scale, right? And when I think about, there's a poster outside here in the coffee area about Tom, this student. That's your student, who says, oh, suddenly I need upskilling, I need to do this course, I need to do that. That's the student for whom this is intended. And when I say scale, that, when you mention numbers, the only color qualification I like to put, and my colleagues at MIT don't like it when I say this, because they say it's a challengeable proposition. I say that scale is not a scalar, it's a vector. So it's many people of many kinds, right? So that's the thing that it has magnitude and direction and differentiation. And they say, no, that's not true physically. I said, no, you get what I'm saying. Last thing is, so how do you move to this capacity building? You got all these innovative possibilities. I will tell you, this is a little plug. So the last 2.5 years, I'm very fortunate, privileged to lead this thing called the Jameel World Education Lab, which is what we're doing. We're bringing these our digital learning innovation, the research that we're doing with brain science, cognitive science, learning science, the pedagogical innovation, the K through 12 efforts also, and we are convening collaborators to work with them in order to look at high-scale transformations. So that's the direct capacity building efforts that we're engaging in. We just had our JWEL week 2 weeks ago with about 130 people from 35 countries who are engaged. We are working with them. There are various memberships and stuff. So sometimes it's to design a new curriculum. Sometimes it is to launch a new institution or a new school like the one we're doing in Belize. And sometimes it's working with Save the Children to bring teachers, not just with tools and techniques, but with compassionate systems, social emotional enablements for teachers who are working with refugee kids. So that's a spectrum of people we're addressing. So that's
Thank you very much, Vijay. Please come. And I especially like the quality at scale part and how everything is getting disrupted. But before we move on to Marcy, any questions directly at Vijay at this point of time? A brief pointed question, that would be ideal. And there you go. Yes, please, go ahead. This is forward, this red is back.
I'm a strong believer that education is person to person.
So, I mean, in many of these situations, see, one of the things that the affordance that you now have is to judiciously combine on-site with online. So learning science, let's say we say that some things are better done in person, right? And so in-person tutoring, when there is a difficult area, because if there are novice learners, for instance, you need that kind of thing. There is also, not to become a technology salesman, but there is also this data-informed personal tutoring that you can do, the data that comes from technology, which allows you to be a more effective, acute, in-person tutor. It is not just, it is, it's informed. So it doesn't take, but then there's this other challenge of how do you scale that in-person tutoring to more than one, more than 10 to hundreds of people? How can you judiciously combine these two? That's the thing, right?
It is a challenge, and why we need to increase the level of education of a larger population so that you have teachers. It kind of
Indeed. Indeed. And so that you can direct the teacher's effort to more those kinds of personal interventions. That's the thing, so that you can be more strategic about applying your resources.
Okay, sure. I was concerned how you could access the stuff for social emotional learning. You said VR, AR, who's making it? Where can you actually access that?
So there are two separate things. The social emotional learning is something called the Compassionate Systems Framework. We are working, it's a strategy. We have worked with Peter Senge and collaborators, and there's a whole process through workshops. That's not an online thing that we're doing. It supplements what we're doing with online, so you can have some amount of exposure, but we actually do these sessions. And separately, there's also certification programs around that. The AR, VR, we do, there is one, for instance, in the car, we were talking about this. How can you do that to understand bias in the workplace about individual treatments? So Fox Harrell, who's a professor at MIT, through him, one of the things that we do through JWEL is we give out grants for innovative projects. So 3 of our grant-funded initiatives around looking at AR and VR to look at how can you make the learning experience much more social emotionally rich by detecting biases so that you can address them.
Thank you.
Oh, sir.
And you can answer it later because it may take more time, so to respect it.
She'll kill me otherwise.
My question was, how are you going to handle the exponential growth of technology with the fact that the education system is not able to keep pace?
We should come back to that.
Let's lead into that. Yes, she did. Thank you. I planted him.
I was flying over the Caribbean, however you want to say it, en route to Trinidad and Tobago to work with their Department of Education when I captured this picture from the window. Bird's eye view of the subaqueous dunes, the new pathways being formed by the tides and currents. It's beautiful, isn't it? So what I want to do today for just a few minutes is paint a visual image for us in this room. We are in the business of creating new pathways for learning. Vijay just talked about it. What do those look like? And I would say that when we look at that, we also have to consider the pathways that are being created by the new next generation workplace and workforce and next generation technologies. And then to have a next gen win, a truly win, it's going to take us to look at those convergence of all the next generation environments and then work together collectively to truly sculpt the future. So let's look at the next generation learner. This is Luca. Luca wakes up in the morning and says, Villa, lights on, in his virtual individual life, and learning assistant activates the lights. Luca, would you like to see your schedule for the day, and it's instantly displayed on his mirror while he brushes his teeth? Villa, play introductory module for lesson 1. It begins to play. He continues to get ready. When the video concludes, Villa automatically creates a short assessment quiz for him while he shaves. Then it's able to pull together the resources and links he's going to need to strengthen where he needs extra learning before the day. As he heads out for work, he has a meeting over at the IBM Hotel Huddle spot. So he goes over, but on his way, he checks his smartwatch to make sure that his instructor received the assignment that he posted last night. After his meeting, he has a little bit of time, so he decides he'll take on one of his virtual labs, and he jumps on one of his digital microscope apps to get it completed. Having trouble with it, clicks real quickly, and an artificial intelligent chatbot gives him some guidance. That done, he decides he will listen to a podcast for one of his recent micro-credentials he's working on. When he's done with that, he puts on his smart glasses to look at some of the resources attached to the podcast. That complete, he decides he will finish up his 3D immersive VR project he's working on for work. And when he has it all completed, he decides that he will go into his lifetime professional portfolio and attach it to one of his badges in his stackable credentials. Now he heads home. He has a video conference meeting with his peers. So he jumps into his self-driving car, and it's instantly displayed on the windshield. Keeps the meeting going, reaches home. Gets out, it's automatically transferred the video conference onto his telepresence robot. But they're having their meeting via holographic projection, so one command to Villa, and it switches. Conveniently, the software transforms his messy living room to the preferred color of choice. They have virtual collaboration, and so his Singaporean colleague puts up an AR of content so they can interact. That done, Luca's enabled to enjoy an evening with his family and a little fun. That's the next generation learner. But we have to also look at the next generation workplace and workforce. And this is what we need to look at, I think. We've talked a little bit about automation, artificial intelligence, but let's look at some of the statistics. I was reading a Forbes magazine interview with the chief product officer of Box, which is a company that automates workflows and processes for about 92,000 businesses. And he said, automation and AI will impact 500 million jobs. The McKinsey Global Institute says that equates to about $15 trillion in US dollars in wages. The World Economic Forum says in the next 5 years, 75 million jobs will be lost or disrupted, but 133 million new jobs will emerge. The Future Jobs Report for 2018 stated that in the next 2 years, we can expect in the next 2 years by 2022, we can expect no less than 54% of the workforce to need upskilling. Now, I would tell you that goes at all levels, even all the way up to executive leadership. I was called in a few years ago to work with Stephen R. Covey, who's the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and a whole slew of others. And he was trying to transition from speaking to his thousands of audiences in person to speaking to them over video conferencing. And he needed upscaling in how to engage a large virtual audience. So we worked together. Now, that's the transformation we're seeing, the currents that are being formed by the tides of change. In a Pew Research Center, I love this. I was reading my favorite thing, it was a report. My favorite quote was from Amy Webb, who is a professor of strategic foresight at New York University and also the CEO of Future Today Institute, I think is what it's called. And here's what she said. I forgot my glasses, so let's see if I can see this. She said, she was talking about the new hybrid skilled knowledge workers. We will need farmers who know how to work with big data sets, oncologists trained as roboticists, biologists trained as electrical engineers. We need to prepare our workforce not just once with a few changes to the curriculum, but prepare a responsive workforce capable of adapting to new processes, systems, and tools every few years. That's pretty daunting when you think about it. But if you also look at other technologies like facial recognition, what roles would come from that? How about a personal privacy advisor to protect you from intrusion? Or HVAC technicians that are going to become smart building technicians, right? The Emergence Capital report named a few jobs I thought were very interesting. Cyborg designers, robotics service technicians, remote healthcare engineers, weather control and genetic engineers, extinct species revivalist. I like that one. I get this one. A mind transfer specialist. Does that kind of spook you out a little? Yeah, it does me too. Those are some next-gen jobs. Next-gen technology, the next generation technologies are impacting us. Here's a visual of it. Walmart bought 17,000 Oculus Go VR headsets to train their more than 1 million employees and sent them to their 200 academies and 5,000 stores. We have universities and medical schools creating all kinds of VR apps. I saw a picture of a patient wearing a VR headset while they're undergoing surgery because they're only under local anesthesia to help them, kind of take them to a different world while they are in surgery. So this is something we need to consider. And that's just one technology. Fidelity Labs, who is seeking employees who are seekers and makers, they created Cora, an avatar agent VR hosted experience to help you learn knowledge about stocks and companies and how to invest. So those are just a few, and we could go on. I don't even have time to go in to gamification and predictive analytics and all of the other things and all the algorithms that are helping us transform the way a student can learn and their paths. I love what the MOOCs and open education movements are doing. I think those are going to be major catalysts in how we reach capacity, how we increase capacity and serve all remote students. But it's going to be key to partnerships, I think. And what we're seeing is that these partnerships play such a vital role when you For example, I worked with the European Commission Joint Research Center to create the Open EDU framework. And now that's an open education resource for anyone interested in developing or growing their Open EDU movement. So there's a resource out there. I was in Brazil last September to keynote, and the federal government university has LAIS laboratory has created a Vasus, which is a video library that serves 150 million citizens across South America. But now through a partnership, they're being translated, all these video resources are being translated into Swahili to reach another 50 million Sub-Saharan African people. That's extending the learning in a much-needed region. I love what Amity University is doing with the government of India and the Pan-African Network. That provides free education to 40 countries of the African Union. So many, many significant things. Yesterday we talked a little bit about the partnerships that are serving refugees. I love the work that's going on with many of you in this room and the roles you're playing. But let's also look at smartphones was brought up and how far it's come. Raul was talking about here it was 10 years ago, here we are today. Look at some of the statistics. When you look at smart technologies and mobility, this is mobility. I think that's another major catalyst in how we can serve all of these learners that need access and affordability. If you look at how many people have smartphones, I was talking to a colleague that went over to deliver a convocation at their partner university in Africa, and he said, here I was, and I pulled out a box. I was going to do an object lesson. I pulled out some candles, and I was laying on the table, and all these students jumped up and went over and said, what is that? And he said, those are candles. They pulled out their smartphone and started taking pictures. Mom's going to like this. We've never seen a candle. We've heard about them. But they were using their smartphone. They didn't know old technology, but they knew new technology, right? So you look at that, but think of it this way, though. What is this doing to the workforce and the next generation of employers? IBM, the hotel I told you about, the IBM Hotel Huddle Spot, those are real places. They have made many of their workers go remote, and they're saving $50 million a year by letting them telework. Aetna, an insurance company, has 14,500 of its 35,000 employees working remotely now. They were able to shed 2.7 million square feet of real estate and save $78 million annually. Okay, now let's think about that for the next generation learner. That means this war on talent that Michael Saylor was talking about, where you can go online and hire them wherever you want and you can get your 20 employees in one day. The opportunities for employees, you can live and work anywhere in the world. I live in remote Texas, and we have 3 remote workers that live on my 20 acres. And we work for companies. One has a company headquartered in Wisconsin, another has a company headquartered in Michigan. I'm global. That's where we are today, 70% working remotely. And then you look at 2.7 billion of the world's population being active users. These new pathways for employment and learning are emerging right around us. It's very exciting. Yes? Okay. So when we look at this, your question is, and I would ask, virtual learning, what does it look like? Mobilely, how does it look? I would tell you it's phenomenal and stellar. I was at a university, and this is what they do for their remote students. That's a VR experience, it's a picture. But I was standing at their campus when they connected over video conferencing to Ghana, and their students, they mail out these little clip-on VR glasses for the smartphone, and the students were having the same experience with these little phones. Drexel University sends them out to all their new online students, and it only costs them less than $2 a pair for those VR glasses that clip on. What does it also look like? I was going to mention virtually inspired, where I have all kinds of technologies. Who's innovating in online learning using all of the technologies that are out there. So let's conclude this with, look, we need to create capacity for all, and the student's face, this was to animate and have all kinds of pictures bounce in and out, but it's not doing it with this slide deck. But you get the idea. Put a face on the next generation learner. And they come in all shapes, sizes, colors, socioeconomic, ethnic, everything, background. We need to provide capacity for all. And we don't want to be guilty of sticking with the way we've always done it, right? And being comfortable with that. Or not reaching out and figuring out how we can work together to provide affordable access and flexible access for all. Let's not be guilty of that. We don't want to blend into the background. If we keep doing the way we've always done it traditionally, with no new pathways, it's the same old, we've just blended into the background, and there's nothing that's forward-thinking and meeting the needs that we have to meet. So when you really conclude with, we have the opportunity, like this beautiful picture of the subaqueous dunes where the tides and the currents have shaped the pathways, we in this room have the ability to create the tides and the currents that are going to shape the future of distance learning. And I threw a lot at you, so I would just like to conclude with saying that I know for the last few days we've had our heads swimming with so much thoughts. I'm happy to meet with anyone that wants a 15-minute strategy call to see how you're thinking and what you're thinking, and I love to do matchmaking too, so you know who to partner with, and have you considered or looked at this? So I'll just offer that. Thank you.
Thank you. I really like your point about let's not be guilty of not addressing the capacity and access for everyone. Before we pass it on to, that's her contact details, Marcy's, and you'll see them again at the later half. Any burning question to be addressed for Marcy at this point of time?
It's not burning.
Yeah, but please go ahead, quickly, brief.
It's a curious question, and it's a question I think we are all pondering about it, that it's very interesting to see the next generation education and who's going to be my bigger worry is about what about educators? How are we building capacities? We need to create bridges or collaborations with industry. We need to create collaborations between governments.
We do. Yeah, so about educators, that is key. If you don't train educators, they will feel inept to use any of the new technologies or to change the pathway or direction. But you can also leverage your students. And I don't care if we're down at the preschool level. I was telling someone earlier that 20 years ago or more, I was in K-12, and we were named the Lighthouse District for Technology Integration by our Commissioner of Education in Texas. The way we did it was that we put the technology in the hands of the instructor, and then we were able to create a shift program, students helping integrate future technologies, and we let the kids who feel comfortable with this. We started with high school students supporting teachers. They could support the learning, the technology, while the teachers supported the learning, or they'd go train the teachers on their planning period. But that turned into moving all the way down to even a third grade level, where we had a third grader who I had a tour group in, and there was an L-shaped bank of computers, and he was saying, if so-and-so, then, this was in the 90s, when Microsoft Office had just come out. And he said, and so I walked over and I said, what are you doing? And he said, teaching Excel. How old are you? He goes, 9, do you mind? They can help us through this. So we have to put the technology in their hand. Do like that university that has the virtual reality. You walk into their classroom, put in your phone number as an instructor. It automatically connects you over Zoom to all your remote students and brings up any VR or other technologies you were planning on using that day. Automatically, it knows what it's going to do. You make it easy for them, give them the support, and give them the access, and the training is key.
Very good. Training the teachers. Very good. Excellent. So with this, over to Bakari.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you, Tom, and for the invitation. I would like just to build on what Vijay and Marcy and Raul talked about. How do we leverage technologies to provide access to education, and how do we do that in Africa? So I will not be talking about what we can do with technology. You already covered, but how are we rather using technology to provide opportunities to those who otherwise would not have access to education? Oops. I want to start by a self-reflection over the last 10, 12 years that I've been active in open education resources, using innovation. This was 2 years ago. I received an award from the Open Educational Consortium. It was enlightening, but 2 years after, I'm thinking, what really are we doing with open educational resources? I've been an advocate around the world in Africa to open up education, and we believe that when we develop OER or we develop resources and make them available, it's great. But we need to maybe think further down the line and see how we can increase impact through open educational resources, which is not what we are talking about right now. We just want, let's develop this thing. I would like to share 4 lessons today. The first is openness does not automatically translate into access. Rather, access is a product of a dynamic interaction among several mechanisms in the social ecology. So, and this is a new, it's not new, it's been there. So what does it mean? At the African Virtual University, we have thousands of courses that are available. But yet, I will talk about it later, in Africa, there are millions of people who cannot access education. So having the resources available is one great step, but it does not necessarily translate to access and have people educated. The second reflection I would like to share is digital technologies and their use have opened up further possibility for open learning. You two have covered this. I would not want to say it. And so what we are looking at is combination of opening up education and digital technologies, how we can serve the underserved in Africa and around the world. The third is flexibility. And I'm looking at flexibility in different ways and the opportunities that bring. For instance, I will talk about later, the population in Africa is growing very fast. So fast that it's not possible to actually build physical universities to face the demand. It's not possible. So we need to look at alternatives and be flexible on how we can leverage technologies in order to have an alternative to accessing and providing education. And fourth and last reflection is there are key challenges in Sub-Saharan Africa. Affordability is one of them. You may have your online courses, your face-to-face courses. The demand is there, but most of the learners and eligible learners cannot afford to pay. There is an issue of content, devices, reliable internet, the perception of a public about decent education. Sometimes they think that it's a lower kind of education compared to face-to-face education. And regulation, we have to face it. Government bodies, higher education regulators are not often ready and are actually perceived to be a challenge when you want to bring any innovation in the space of education, especially higher education. Let's talk about Africa, building on what or I will just say it. The population in Africa, 2015, is estimated to be 1.2 billion. And out of this, 60% are less than 25. The youth population is projected to increase by 42% in the next 10 years. And yet, currently, access to higher education is around 7 to 8% in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we also know that it requires 10 to 12% of graduates to sustain economic development. So we can see that actually there are opportunities in Africa. The fast-growing countries are in Africa. The world businesses are moving to Africa because it's the next frontier, but we do have a huge challenge on how to actually train the human capital that is required to take the continent forward. And I think Susan and Vijay, they both talk about it, and Rahul, the future of the world is not focused only on the US or in Canada, but we are in the global environment. And because this is possible with technology, we can work from everywhere. It means that maybe among these millions of young Africans, they will be contributing to the global human capital. So we need to train them. And that's why at the African Virtual University, our focus has been how to use technologies for massification, access to massification in higher education and continuing education in the continent. That's our focus. That's what we wanted, and that's what we're doing. Micro-credentials and badges, we are thinking about it. This is something that we can do. However, like I said just a minute ago, or a couple of minutes ago, regulation is not on our side to do these kind of things across the continent. Just a brief about the African Virtual University. We are a pan-African organization, meaning that governments, 19 governments, have signed our charter. So we work directly with countries and universities within those countries in the area of increasing access through information technologies. We have several partner institutions, about 53. We work in 30 African countries in French, Portuguese, and English. And since inception, we work closely with our partner institution. We don't offer degree program ourselves, but the degree programs are offered through our partner institution. There have been 55,000 trainers, learners who've been trained since inception. To me, this is great because we have several challenges, but despite the challenges, this has been possible. These are the countries that we cover in Africa. If you can look at, so we cover mostly Sub-Saharan Africa, not North Africa, except of Sudan. Well, Sudan could be Sub-Saharan North Africa. So, and then you have the countries in French-speaking countries in blue, English-speaking in red, and Lusophone means Portuguese, basically speaking. And I work in Kenya, that's where we are located. That's where we have our headquarters, and we have a regional office in Senegal that deal with Francophone countries. So I already talked about these numbers. If you look at the way we are widening access through blended learning, you will see that the biggest part of our training are for short courses. Less than degrees and diploma. But we are trying to reverse this and I will talk about that later on. This is just an example of a certificate program that we have offered. with 18 universities. And these 18 universities are, I believe, in about 10, 11 or 12 or 14 countries. So this is basically our model. We have partner institutions in several countries. So, and we offer these programs in collaboration with the universities. So this is a blended course. We had one on networking administration and programming. So it's computer science, which means that you need practicals. And since we are a small team in Nairobi and in Dakar, so we need to leverage our relationship with our partner institution where we have learning centers so that part of the course is provided online and the practicals are done in the labs in our partner institutions. With this collaboration, this is a six-week course. We enrolled 360 students, and the completion rate was 55%. It's great given the challenges of access and all other challenges we are facing in Africa. My last slide. To do that, we need to leverage what have been told here, the fourth industrial revolution, next generation of learners. We need all of this to improve our teaching and learning in Africa. And we need collaboration to do this kind of things. What we are doing right now is the next step, what I believe that is very important for ABU. Our stakeholders are asking now to be providing directly ourselves degree programs. And so this is, in the next couple of years, we'll be offering directly more degree programs ourselves across the continent. Thank you very much. We're looking for partnership. It's not an easy undertaking, and I'm sure that around this room there are a lot of people who are doing something similar. Partnership could be just maybe exchanging ideas, learning from each other, improving what we are doing, or maybe working together. Thank you very much for your attention.
So any questions specific to Bakri at this point of time? Yeah, maybe we can start with that.
Thank you very much. My question is to you, but it's also to the overall panel. How are we, or should better state, how is our global education learning system training our young people to solve the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, but you know, I say, my belief is that we are living in a global environment. Today, based in the US, you may be hiring someone from Nigeria to work for you. And that person, your business is based in the US, you're serving US customers. Basically, that person is part of the human capital you're using. But we need to think globally. That's the reality. And today, I believe that technologies are allowing us to train people from anywhere and to utilize people from anywhere. And I believe that, so it's important that all of us work together, collaborate. Like, I really like what you're doing with the micro masters. This is futuristic, but it's happening. So we can all learn from that. You can have free courses for people can take it, and then if you want to go further, they can go to ABU, they can go to MIT. So I think there are pathways that are open, and we need to really work together and see how we can open up these opportunities to more people around the world.
Great point. Thank you for the question. And maybe Masi or Vijay, if you want to add,
I would like to add
SDG4,
to that.
yeah?
I think that we are in a very good position with these students because as we look at the new skills we're trying to give them that Dr. Banerjee mentioned yesterday, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity being one of my favorite. Empowering the students to develop those skills to create but also raising the awareness of what our UN SDGs are and how we're trying to meet those. What does that look like from a humanitarian perspective? How can you as an entrepreneur create? And Dr. Neal mentioned yesterday, I think it was you, Terry, that mentioned showed students and how they were coming up to learn a skill and how they were turning around to serve people. And I think with this new generation of learners, especially when you think about the fact that over 80% of the workforce in the next 2 years will be millennials and down, and giving them that attitude, they want to be part of something much bigger than they are and to have that impact. And we in education, if we create those pathways that empower them to be entrepreneurs, to serve in humanitarian ways, to think outside the box, using the resources in the box, as Victoria would say. We had a conversation yesterday. I think that's the key.
So, really good point. And maybe this is a good time to take the questions from the panel, and we'll start with the previous question, which was unaddressed. But this is a good time for you to reflect back any carryover of interesting thoughts and questions from yesterday's session. There were a lot of interesting conversations and questions and comments raised, and in addition to what has been discussed here. So let's start with the comment from all three of you on this question that technology is moving much faster than higher education's capacity to respond to it.
So I'd like to take that up, and at some point, actually I want to emphasize what Tomasi just said about the kinds of learning that you want to foster the SDG goals. Hopefully I'll get to a slide there. But your question about how do we respond to this overwhelming force of technology in education. There is a thing that, and there is a two-part answer. One of the things that we always say, in the light of everything changing, what is it that you keep, right? So when we talk about technology, and you can always do technology around the edge, and even when we launched OpenCourseWare, we said we have to really think about what is the value proposition of an MIT education, right? And it goes to your point about contact. At that point, circa 1999, we said that our value proposition is realized through a high bandwidth of interaction between great students and great faculty, and bringing the joy, the practice, the tools of research into undergraduate education. In 1999, we said the only way we know how to do that is in face-to-face situated learning experiences. Fast forward to 2012, we said, we've learned a thing or two about online digital learning sciences. We can actually do this without compromising that value proposition, right? So, and perhaps not expressed in the same way, this is when it was launched, So the question is, I think even when we went to India on this project, they said, oh, MIT technology. I said, no, we actually want to promote is active learning, hands-on learning. And we want to look at technology as an enablement. So a sharp focus on what you want to keep, what are the invariants of quality that you value, I think is what you do and enhance. That's part one. The part two answer is, it has to do with the question that has come up is, how do you make sure educators can take advantage of this, I mean, the whole idea of setting the World Education Lab was capacity building for educators being all the way from policy makers to practitioners, right? But the thing is, if that doesn't change, there's this thing, I remember doing a project once at MIT when all these converged technologies are happening, and Bob Metcalf, who's the father of Ethernet technology. So Bob says, typically when an education system collides with an technological innovation system, one of three things can happen. Nothing happens to either or both, superficial change happens to either or both, or profound change happens to both. So the last is what, we'll say epistemological change is what we really desire. Much of what we see happening is in the middle, in the middle range. And what that means is that profound change to happen, educators have to change. We launched a big active learning program, Teal, created this room, visualization, I want to say Alana, lots of stuff. But initially the student reports were terrible. They just jumped all over it. Why? Because the instructor who did, one of the instructors, what they were doing was, in this new setup, they were teaching the old way. It was PowerPoint by death, only it was magnified. So if we don't change that, a last thing that so the teacher education point becomes this thing. How do you create this thing so that we can actually, it takes two to tango. The thing about, we've all, systems analysts, we've all done this early in a past life. When I started first in India, everyone wants to automate their system, financial system. What is the first thing that you do when you do automate a system? You study the existing system. Why is this paper moving from this person to that person? What is the process that is happening, right? The only persistent benefit that technology brings is the opportunity to look at what and why you were doing things in the first place, right? So when we bring an MIT online course, we're not saying let's slap this thing on the technology, it's re-engineering the course. What are the learning outcomes? The term never existed, right? What are the learning outcomes? How can we this thing? You're actually re-engineering course. I think that's a key point.
Very good. So a brief comment, Marcy, and then Bakri on this question. Do you think, how do we catch up, educators and higher education, when technology is moving much faster than us?
It's moving way too fast for us to be at the speed it needs to be at, and by the time we learn it, it will change again. So you really have to empower educators to not be have fear. That's main. And then you have to also help them understand that change is coming, and the benefit it will bring to not only their students but to them. And so if you can get that mindset changed, then to keep up with the speed at which things are happening, it helps them be much more flexible and fluid with the changes that are coming. You don't need to go, as they say, eat the entire elephant. You take it one bite at a time. By the time you get up to his knee, it's already changed again. So I think it's just teaching them to go with the flow and create that tide that's going with the flow and keep the agility. Do you know, a lot of the companies I talked with, their number one goal right now is agility. I found that very, very interesting to dive into and say, why? Why are you doing that? And it's really that things are changing so rapidly. We need to learn how to flow with the change and what we can do, as Vijay said, to make it the best it can be.
I really like that point also, like the adopting the agility mindset even as educators. Bakri, what would you say? How do we keep
what
up?
I would say, I think that the institution should have the capacity to analyze and research and development and look at how they can leverage, how they can use these technologies. Some institutions are doing it, like MIT, so you have the lab, and AVU, we had not a lot of money, but we set up what we call the Center for Virtual Education Innovation, because we need to comprehend how these changes and the new opportunities, what can we do to improve our teaching and learning, our business model, have cheaper courses, etc. This is one level, I believe. The other one is now implementing the changes within the universities, and that's where the problem is. Because we have, I'm not sure, maybe not the US, but around the world, universities, institutions are one of the most conservative. And so this is a challenge now to have lecturers, even administrators, just adopt new ways of doing things. And I think that because of that, technology will be always moving most faster that we can actually observe and implement in higher education.
Very good. Thank you. So this is a good time we have last 12 minutes. And so let's take questions, and we'll address them together. So your question, please, Terry.
Okay. So, is that on? Yeah. So, we're here together to talk about closing the global skills gap. And I'm confess to a kind of growing discomfort that we're very focused on the 10 to 12% in the university sector, and also
maybe I'll tell a story to help you understand why I'm feeling like a lot of what we're talking about may not be relevant for the globe. So I was in Zambia last month. They've been having load shedding since June because they don't have enough electricity. So what that really meant in practice is only electricity from 11 p.m. till 9 a.m. And the TVET Institute that we're working with, the computer tutor was getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning so he could teach his students for 4 hours. And I got a local SIM card because I like to stay connected, and I just learned that it was very random when I was connected and when I wasn't. So that's the first thing, kind of the, I mean, I'm very excited by all this, but
Sorry,
I'm thinking,
Terry,
it doesn't
can we get
fit.
to the question, please? That would be helpful.
Okay. And the second thing is that so I guess it's how we cater for the 88% that are not going to go to university in a context where you can't even rely on electricity.
That's a brilliant question. Thank you, Terry. Well, that number itself, because our conversation is about helping that capacity gap fulfilled, brilliant question that how do we address that 88% which is still not in the conversation when even technology cannot reach them to that. So we'll address that. Any other question before we address that question to make sure that we can get to it? So question brief and then the second.
Yeah, I think very amazing. I mean, thoughts have come in, and one of the thought that is on my mind is technology end in itself, or it's a means to the end, which is education in a changing times, in a changing world. So how are we going to look at that? Because I think what Terry was trying to, the first question is related to that, like basically we have to see the world and look at the role of educators and also see, because when printing press came in, that was a disruption. Internet, we have forgotten, maybe, a couple of decades back, internet. So should we get lost in technology or find a way for education and technology?
Very good. So how do we keep the ethos of education and not get lost in the technology itself? Can we take this third question and then, yeah?
Yes, I think yesterday we talked about attitude, and now you mentioned the word agility. So I think it's kind of odd for educators. For me, it's a value, the whole growth mindset. So I think it's kind of odd that we have to teach teachers a growth mindset. I mean, the value, I thought, was that it being a lifelong learner.
Brilliant question that we are teaching our students about growth mindset, and maybe we ourselves are being held back. So we have 3 questions, and let's start with Terry's question on the 88% who is still not left out as an example. Bakri, what would you say?
Well, this is a great question. I talked about 7 to 8%, accessing higher education in Africa. You have this large amount of the youth who are not going to university, who have maybe finished secondary school or primary school or not primary school, but they are part of the workforce. We cannot ignore them. And I think that what we are trying to do, I'm planning to do at ABU, is to look at how we can develop just very short courses to improve, to help those people who have some kind of secondary education perhaps, improve. For instance, if you are an apprentice, you will need some kind of project management, you will need some kind of accounting, just to provide some skills that will enable them perhaps to improve what they're doing to improve their income. But this is a huge problem, this is a huge issue that I believe is not really addressed in Africa. I'm not sure about India or other part of the world.
That's a great question also, because we get lost sometime in the future disruption which technology will do, but many people still do not have the basic access to technology. So we are talking about really a huge disparity in access, even in technology, before it gets to access to education. Great point. Marcy, would you like to take that question about educators not having that growth mindsets themselves, that paradox?
Oh, thanks a lot, Rahul. Appreciate it. Larita, I'll answer that question for you by really saying that I think when you look at the companies that are really pushing for agility, it is not an age or a profession that limits us when it comes to agility. For teachers, every one of us know that we've always done it this way. So 7 deadly words, or we've never done it that way before. We've always done it this way. And so teaching a new mindset is an ongoing lifelong learning. And for teachers, it's of paramount to help them. I find that the best way to learn is to teach. And for students, when you get them to teach the courses, we grow as educators as well. But that mindset is an always evolving thing. And I think that goes back to what Terry was saying with the 88%, and what Dr. Banerjee was saying, that when you're looking at your limitations, what resources we have to work with and where our minds are, and how we can be agile, have agility, and develop the skill sets we need in the environment we're given. Maybe it comes from it's not about the technology. That's just an empowerment tool. It's about what we do with things. And when we have limitations, I am one that I don't like yabbits. Do you guys like yabbits? I cannot stand yabbits. Do you know what a yabbit is? It's the person that always looks at you when you say, you know what we could do? We could create these sources and we make them offline, and then we can make them available. And what about when we have electricity limitations? Well, we could do this. Here's how we could serve those 88%. And that's, agility thinking and being flexible. And then thinking about how technology can support us. I come hitting all 3 questions, if that's okay. But the yabbit's the person who goes, yeah, but it won't work because... Right? And so we have to teach people to go past the yabbits to really think outside the box and use the resources within the box. Victoria, I love that statement. I'm going to use it from now on. It's just a way, I think, to address all 3.
I like that. And so maybe, Vijay, if you would like to address that third question. Unless you wanted to.
No. Actually, and I'll apologize in advance if there's any controversy here. The thing is, and the technology, Terry's point, we'll get to, because a large part of the alternate modalities which are not cast in typical formal education, of delivering educational opportunities, what we're talking about. And a big part of that is also something that you referred to, which is really the ecosystem. Suddenly you don't think about an institution, but an ecosystem. ABU is a great example, where you said, you don't give degrees. They're all over there, right? So the ecosystem becomes a very important answer thing. However, I want to go somewhere else for a second. Yesterday, I was having a wonderful conversation with Open Pedagogy. That's the gentleman out there, right? And we were talking about, in a different way, about agility, right? So what does agility mean in the context of the fact that you create the enablements in your learner to be able to learn different things, learn new things in new ways, go on. And that's, so learning how to learn, we talk about metacognition, and being also both vulnerable and open to the fact that we can make changes in what we teach and how we teach. That is not something that typically in institution, whether it's MIT, we focus on. There's a lot of attention. In fact, one of the most disruptive things, I was just doing a panel, that we can do is saying, what are the hard questions we can ask about what our students are not learning? There's a lot of content that is being learned. Are we really enabling them to be inquiry-minded, to take risks, celebrate constructive failure, right? Because that's the world where most of us are growing up to be autonomous learners. What kind of, because we walk in, so much of our learning just happens on our own. Then, so what is it? So that's agility for me, creating that kind of stuff. So I think there is an opportunity over here induced by technology to think about, are we creating the capabilities for agility in the learner to be an autonomous learner? So that's the thing. Before we get comfortable with the fact that, we've always been doing this, so what's different? We have not been doing it.
So that's a great point, actually, Vijay. Sorry to interrupt here, but I'm just looking at and honoring my role of moderator. We have last 1 minute left.
Why don't we? So the technology part, I mean, there are different modalities. My only plea, Rahul, and to all is to think about technology a little more generously. I mean, this is technology, this is technology.
That's true.
That's a great point. So with this, we will pretty much come to an end, and maybe I'll give a final word to each of our panelists. So next year, we are here. This is a great initiative. We got the best of the brains in the sector to trying to solve this problem. So thanks for Saylor to bringing us together. So next year, we are again here, or the year after. And we are talking about the capacity issue again, isn't it? What would have looked different next year or the year after, isn't it? So have we solved the capacity issue to some extent, and what we have done differently? So maybe the final word, starting with Bakri, brief comment, what would it look different next year when we are trying to solve this problem of capacity?
Well, I'm not sure. That's well, I can tell you what I hope would happen. Yeah. I think the issue of capacity is important. What I really do hope is that we are trying to do the best we can, but together we can do better.
Perfect.
What I really do hope that we can collaborate, we can work together so that we can solve problems.
Very good. So partnership as one of the biggest enablers to solve one of this problem, coming together as institutionals or partners. Very good. Marcy?
He just took mine. Because I was
Hashtag retweet.
Hashtag retweet. There you go. And I was going to say that this time next year, I think that one thing that will have happened is that as quickly as these technologies and new pathways, the next-gen workplace, next-gen workforce, and next-gen learner are changing, I think the difference next year will be we'll go, oh, that's what we talked about, it's already happened. Oh, that's what we talked about, it's already happened.
Brilliant. So the next-gen learners, keep in mind, in terms of how it will transform our ability to respond to them will really define our success. Vijay?
So I think all relationship with perfection is asymptotic. You never get there. So we won't ever solve the capacity problem. We'll make progress towards it and hopefully identify a new set of capacity issues, but not the same ones.
Brilliant. Now that's a solid point. Work is never done. Work in progress. And thank you very much for joining this. And I have to conclude with one key point which I learned from yesterday. We are in a very tough situation. We are doing a great job in terms of trying to solve some of the biggest problems, and there are no easy answers. So stay at it, and hashtag never give up. Thank you very much.